Hello, everyone. I am David D. Hilster, president of the CMPS, and this is our annual fund drive. First, I want to thank all of those who have been paying their annual and monthly memberships through our automatic membership system. It is greatly appreciated. Since 1994, this group has been pioneering support for critical thinkers outside of mainstream science, and we continue to do so through our virtual presence, through our Saturday morning live streams, and our website discussions. Since last year, we have cut our expenses down to something reasonable for our current membership. In 2026, we hope to implement the Discourse Discussion Group as our primary discussion software. Our current website system, in my opinion, is not ideal. We hope to change that. To donate, you can go to fund.naturalphilosophy.org and donate whatever amount that works for you. Your contributions are greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Saturday session of the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society. If you hold on a minute, I'll just check that I'm coming through on YouTube. Okay, thanks. So the sound seems to be coming through on YouTube. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Today's talk, let's pull it up now. And if I can, let's see, some comments already are coming through. That's just, I think it's just general chat. Okay. I don't know when I see pop-ups, I don't know whether you actually see them or everybody else. So anyway, let's get on to today's talk. Yes, brilliant. So today's talk is about the myths of Einstein's relativity. And unfortunately, many of the things that they tell us about Einstein's relativity is just mythology. And when you get the atheists, they complain that the Bible is claims to the Bible, and when you actually start looking into science too much, you come up with the same problem, that a lot of the things that are said are just myths, they're not actually true. And so that's kind of worrying. But it's the general talk of people, they like to say things which sound good but are not necessarily true. And it happens a lot in science. And it makes the subject sound more impressive than it really is. So hold on a moment. I intermittently get these surprise coughs come on to me. So I'm a bit annoyed about that. I don't understand what is happening to me. So I'm going to go full screen here, from my end anyway. I'll try to bring my, still playing around here, see if I can get it just to that one thing. Yeah, that's better. So hopefully you can still hear me. I've brought myself down and just shown the slides. So I'll just check that. Yeah. So it seems to be working. You should be able to hear me talking without actually seeing me, and I can bring my slides up to full. So anybody not hearing anything, let me know. Where's it gone? Make a screen big again. I've lost that bit. Oh, there it is. So, The Myths of Special Relativity by Roger Anderton. And so the structure of today's talk is number one, there are myths of Einstein's relativity, common things said about relativity that are not true, and just myths. And number two is the issue I'll be getting onto is the teaching of relativity has been corrupted, and these myths are taught to physics students. So it's very insidious. And number three, dissident physicists who don't believe in Einstein's relativity have been deceived that these myths are relativity. And number four, mainstream physics community manages to cover up a method called quietism. Also have mathematics as well to complain about, but we'll pass on that. So today's talk is mainly about the myths and what the consequences of the myths are. So the consequences are, one of the big consequences is the myths are being taught as Einstein's relativity. And so people were just coming along believing those myths are Einstein's relativity. And Einstein wasn't necessarily saying that. He was saying something completely different most of the time. So all these myths are built up as to relativity, and it makes the whole subject very much a mess when people who believe in Einstein's relativity believe these myths, and the people who don't believe in Einstein's relativity believe these myths as well. So it kind of destroys meaningful discussion, and really all you're talking about is mythology and not what relativity really is. So I'm hooked on I'm going voice going again. I'm hooked on artificial intelligence, and the one I prefer is ChatGPT. I've tried others, and they're not so good at dealing with physics. With ChatGPT, it will give you the alternative point of view, and that's useful if you're dealing with physics and you don't believe in a mainstream point of view. You can check with ChatGPT what is the mainstream point of view compared to the alternative point of view. And so I find that very useful. And of course, you can't trust artificial intelligence completely. So you've got to do your own research as well. But it's a very useful guide, in my opinion, as to contrasting the information sources out there. So I find it a good source for collecting the relevant information. I mean, physics is such a vast subject now, it's very difficult to get it from all the different sources. You've got the philosophy of physics, you've got the history of physics, you've got the experimental side of physics, you've got the and the theoretical side of physics, and loads of other different areas where physics is dealt with. I forgot about the mathematics of physics. That's also another area it's dealt with. And also, you got all that from the mainstream, and you got all a vast amount of information being said from the people who have an alternative view on it, from the alternative physics side of things. So it's just getting impossible to go through all these different sources. And that's why I'm finding artificial intelligence good for getting that information to me. And so I think a note on how to use artificial intelligence is relevant here, because I'm getting such feedback from people who don't really trust artificial intelligence. It is important to ask questions in the right ways, because if you don't ask the questions in the right way, then AI is going to give you a different answer than if you did ask the question the right ways. So if you ask AI to just give you the mainstream point of view, it will give you that. But if you just ask a general question, and it will automatically give you the official mainstream point of view. And so you then have to ask it, what is the alternative point of view? And if you don't ask the alternative point of view, it won't tell you. So you've got to be careful in how you're using AI, ask it the questions in the right way, and from which point of view it's working from. So if you ask AI, is relativity correct? It will just give you the official mainstream point of view and say, yes, it's correct. And that seems to be what all the AIs have been set up to do. It would just, in general, talk to you from the official mainstream point of view. However, if you first ask AI, such as the one I'm using, ChatGPT, it will then start listing them, and that's where I'm getting this information from about the myths. If you ask ChatGPT, is relativity correct, it will just say to you, yes, it is. But then if you ask it what are the mistakes or what is the myths of relativity, it will just then start asking, will then just start telling you. Yeah. And then if you ask after that, is relativity correct, it will then has a harder time saying yes. If it said yes in the first instance, it will then try to come up with an excuse as to how going from the myths that it's wanting to say something different. So saying relativity is mostly correct or something like that is what its response will be if you pressurize it, as opposed to it just come out straight out and telling you yes. So care needs to be taken with AI and ask the questions in the right way so that it does not just parrot off what the mainstream says. Taking that sort of care with it, and it is, in my opinion, a good information source. So I'm getting information about what the alternative point of view is to relativity from the relativity dissidents, and contrast it to the people who believe in relativity, the relativity believers. So so part one. So my screen's on full at the moment, so I'll just make sure everything's coming through all right. I think I'm all right. Private chat got things in there. Where are you? Oh, that was at 301. We can still hear you. The message at 305 is we can hear you. So hopefully people can hear me. That was it a couple of minutes ago. So hopefully it's carrying on. It's hard to know whether I'm just talking to myself here or whether it's coming through properly. So part one, there are lots of myths about relativity, and I'm only going to highlight some of them. So far, ChatGPT has given me 50 myths. It's given me a list of 50. And at the moment, I've tried to narrow that down, and it's given me 12 core myths, the 12 big ones about relativity, which most people believe in. So if you've got 50 myths, then most of the things that people believe and call relativity is just mythology. So here's what the structure is going to be from ChatGPT. It's going to say what the relativity claim is and what's actually observed from experiments and so forth, and where the conceptual mistake lies, and that's where it leads to the myth. And then it's going to say how a Lorentzian stroke absolute time framework resolves it. And so you've got a contrast between what Einstein says in 1905, which became special relativity, and what Lorentz said before that, which became Lorentz theory. So you're contrasting two theories a lot of the time, Lorentz's theory versus Einstein's special relativity. And so that's important to note, is that Lorentz theory is empirically equivalent to Einstein's special relativity for experiments that are said to conform to special relativity. You've got the case that some experiments don't conform to special relativity, and then what the mainstream then does is they sort of do add-ons to make it conform. So you've got the paper from 1905 by Einstein, that's the core part of special relativity, which onto, and it still gets called special relativity. So really it's contrasting what Einstein initially said as his theory. So the myth number one is there is no absolute time. And so from relativity's claim, time has no universal meaning. Each inertial observer possesses their own equally real time, and there is no global now. So where is that supported by experiment? And it's not. Experiments don't support that claim. And what you get observed is something similar but not the same. And what you get from experiment is no experiment has ever observed time itself. So you've got to take into account that no experiment has ever observed time. And so a claim about time is, well, there's no experimental backup for it. There's no experiment showing time has no unit, that time is the way that relativity claims it to be. And so what is observed actually is clock readings, and you've got to take into account the difference between time and clock readings, because clocks aren't making a measurement of time. They're not actually time itself. Clock readings are not really time itself. So you've got to take into account there is a difference between what experiments show and what is being claimed on top of it. So what's being claimed on top of these experiments is this myth about time. They're telling you the nature of what they think time is, just from something which is not shown by experiment. What you get instead is rates of physical processes, and that's what you're measuring. And then with the clocks, you also got this problem with synchronization. If you've got a collection of clocks, you've got to have them all operating with the same synchronization. You can't have them all showing different times. But when you get to relativity, Einstein wants these clocks to have different times. He wants them synchronized in the way he's proposing, which is now called Einstein synchronization. And that synchronization results in these clocks showing different time measurements. And so that's the issue there. Synchronization procedures of the clocks is one of the issues of how you're going to affect the clock readings. So the conceptual error based upon this mythological statement is relativity reifies coordinate time into ontology. So you're not supposed to do that. Ontology is the nature of things. So what is the myth? The myth that's being created is you're thinking you can impose onto time its nature just from this experiment, when the experiment's not showing that. And so we go to Einstein, and he defines time by synchronized clocks, and then concludes that time itself is relative. And that's a circular definition. So he's making a fallacy there of logic. He's defining things a certain way, and then he's thinking that is what it is. He's thinking his definition is proving what time is, but it doesn't. It's just a circular argument, and it's just a fallacy. Next slide. So if you go for what the experiments actually show, nothing in experiment forbids a universal time parameter, and you've got frame dependent clock rates. And so my comment on that, because that's previous with what ChatGPT was saying, so since Lorentz theory deals with the same experiments as special relativity, Lorentz theory has a preferred straight absolute frame, so experiments are not discarding it. To say otherwise, it's a myth. So from Lorentz theory, you should be talking about time from a preferred frame, and you could treat that as your absolute time. So there's nothing forbidden that from experiment. And so the claim of relative time, that is just a myth, unless you add on the fact that it's only a claim which is metaphysical. So myth number 2 is simultaneity is physically relative. So relativity's claim is two spatially separated events that are simultaneous in one frame are not simultaneous in another in reality. So that is a myth. So what is actually observed, this is from experiment, there is no direct observation of simultaneity. So it's the same thing again. There's no direct observation of time itself, and there's no direct observation of simultaneity itself. All simultaneity judgments rely on light signals and synchronization conventions. And that issue of synchronization is how you are synchronizing the clock. So it's a convention as to how you synchronize the clocks. So the conceptual error, Einstein's synchronization, that's his way he wants you to synchronize the clocks, assumes equal one-way light speed. And so that issue is if you've got light going in one direction, if you've got, say, a clock at point A and a clock at point B, then you're sending light from A to B, and you're measuring how long it takes light to travel that distance. So you've got to know the time which the light left from the clock A and the time from the clock B when the light got there. And so that's one-way light speed. But Einstein has a synchronization method of how he wants those clocks synchronized. So it's an assumption he's making that clock A and clock B are synchronized the way he says, and that then from that assumption of how, it's a convention of how to synchronize the clocks, he's then assuming equal one-way light speed. So he's imposing on the experiment a convention, and it's not really proper to do that. It's a circular argument again. Relativity then treats the consequences of this assumption as physical facts. And so what's wrong with that is you can change the synchronization. You can have the clock synchronized in a different way to the way that Einstein wants them synchronized. So the way he's synchronizing the clocks, he's assuming equal one-way light speed. But you don't have to do that. You can synchronize clocks different ways. And if you change the simultaneity, if you change the clock's synchronization, then you can make simultaneity absolute again. So this relative simultaneity only comes about because of the way that Einstein wants to synchronize the clocks. If you do it a different way, you don't get that. So my comment, in Lorentz's theory, still have simultaneity as objective in the preferred frame of that theory. So to say otherwise is another myth. And so if we go back to myth 2, simultaneity is physically relative. So making that claim is false. It's only something which Einstein is putting onto experiments as his sort of mythology, as the way he wants to talk about things. And it doesn't actually come from the experiments. Hence, it's a myth. Myth number 3 is time dilation is time itself slowing. And if I refer you back to myth 1, they actually have not been able to measure time itself from experiment. That's not what experiments show you. Saying time itself is slowing is just another myth. So relativity's claim is moving clocks experience slower passage of time. Now, what is observed is atomic clocks tick slower when moving, particle decay rates change. No one has ever observed time flowing and time changing speed. Nobody's ever observed that. So the conceptual error here is relativity conflates the clock with the quantity it measures. And conflates means you're mixing up two different things. And so this is like claiming temperature itself changes because thermometers respond differently. So if you have a lot of thermometers all lined up and they're all acting differently, then you say, well, that is the thermometers being faulty. You don't suddenly think, well, temperature is different everywhere else. You've got to have a way of getting the thermometers to work in the same way. Myth number 4 is, this is a very important one, is ether was disproven. So the relativity's claim is the Michelson-Morley experiment killed the ether. And what is observed, Michelson-Morley only showed null fringe shift. So you've got this split between what experiments show, which is the null, that particular experiment, Michelson-Morley, only shows null fringe shift, and then people want to put a mythology on top of it. They want to put the myth on top that there's no ether. So the conceptual error here is the Michelson-Morley actually ruled out a rigid stationary ether. It did not rule out contracting matter, entrained or dynamical ether. And Lorentz theory still has those sort of types of version of ether, which it's trying to deal with. So it's another myth. So saying that ether was disproven is just a myth. Myth number 5 is Minkowski space-time is physically real. And relativity's claim is space-time is a real 4-dimensional entity. Now that conflicts with what is actually observed. What is observed is no experiment observes space-time. No experiment observes time itself, and no experiment observes space-time itself. What experiments observe is events and measurements. So you're building this myth on top of what the experiments are showing. So the conceptual error is mathematical unification is mistaken for a physical substance. Geometry replaces dynamics, and space-time is really just a calculational tool. To say otherwise, you're just building a myth by saying it's physically real. So there are numerous other myths given by those who believe Einstein's relativity, and the myths are taught to physics students. So at the moment, ChatGPT has pointed out 50 myths to me, and these myths are just commonly taught as what Einstein's relativity is, when it isn't. It's not. They're saying things, they're myths, and they're not built upon what the experiments actually show. And this is what ChatGPT has pointed out to me after going through it saying, yes, relativity is correct. I then ask it about what is wrong with relativity, and it will just come up with this, that people are adding these extra things to what relativity is. They're adding these myths on top of it. So in the view of ChatGPT, when you say to it, is relativity correct? It would say yes, but it does not believe in the myths on top of it. And people are going by the myths on top of relativity, not just what ChatGPT considers strict special relativity. People are adding these myths on top of it and calling it relativity. And ChatGPT does not agree with the myths being put on top of it. So there's a split between what ChatGPT claims is relativity and what people believe is relativity. The people believe the myths. ChatGPT says, no, not the myths. That's not relativity. So when it says it's correct, it's not adding on the myths, unlike the people. So next is false relativity is taught instead of the actual theory of special relativity. So interrogating ChatGPT, when I'm saying about what ChatGPT claims are myths, well, I point out to it that these myths are being taught to physics students. For people who are learning relativity, they are being taught these myths. And so then ChatGPT comes up with, well, relativity is not being taught properly to physics students. So that's where this is coming from, part 2. What it then admits to after interrogation is that a false relativity is being taught to physics students instead of the actual theory of special relativity. Students are told myths. So we should now be familiar with fake news versus real news as it's thought out in the news media. But there's also fake scientists to consider that is being promoted by the mainstream. My voice is going, I'll have a drink. So you got the fake science, which is being promoted by the mainstream. And the mainstream is promoting these myths as science, particularly Einstein's relativity. And so asking ChatGPT more questions about special relativity, it told me that false things were being taught for special relativity. In my view, a false theory is being taught instead of special relativity. So you've got fake relativity being taught and what people believe instead of the real relativity. But AI does not want to go that far and say a false special relativity is being taught. Instead, ChatGPT wants to say that some things taught in special relativity are wrong, but not all things. So along with this collection of what ChatGPT considers is proper special relativity, these myths are being taught to students as well. So you've got a mix of some things that are true and some things are false. And as far as I'm concerned, that makes it all false. So the issue is then that this false science is what most people believe. This is the one that's popularized in the, it's a false relativity. So I asked if special relativity was being taught wrong. ChatGPT said yes, exactly that. So everything, the whole teaching process for relativity is at fault according to ChatGPT. Its version of relativity, what it considers relativity properly, has had all these myths added to it. So what I meant is often taught as if these things were proven, when in fact they are interpretive additions, so and not logical or experimental consequence of special relativity. And that's where the myths are coming from. You've got the experiments, and the experiments are showing certain things, and then on top of that, you're having interpretive additions added on. And that's not logical, and it's not actually coming from the experiments consequences of special relativity. Hence, you're forming these myths. And so ChatGPT says, let me be very precise and careful here, because this is the core confusion that has persisted for over a century. So this is the artificial intelligence pointing out that there is a vast amount of confusion in relativity. And it's where all these myths are coming into relativity, which have created the confusion. Number one from ChatGPT is what special relativity strictly proves. From its postulates in mathematics, special relativity proves only this, is the following. The laws of nature, and it's not ontology, are, and that's for the specific experiments that are supposed to conform to special relativity, and as opposed to other experiments. Next is observers using Einstein synchronization, the clocks, will measure time dilation, and I prefer the term clock dilation because it's an effect on the clocks and not on time itself. Next is you measure length interaction, and that's still based on the synchronization convention. And also from that, you would disagree on simultaneity as defined by that synchronization. So your synchronization, the way you're synchronizing it by the Einstein synchronization, is actually given relative simultaneity, but synchronize it another way and you get can get absolute simultaneity or any other form. And next, he says, ChatGPT says, no experiment can detect uniform motion using Lorentz covariant laws. And that's it. That is what ChatGPT considers special relativity proper, the proper special relativity. And nothing more is logically false from that. That is all you've got from special relativity. And on top of that, ChatGPT considers these myths are being added. And so, number two, what is often taught as if it were proved, but is not. So these things like time itself flows differently for different observers is often taught as if it was, as I pointed out earlier when I dealt with that in the myth. It's not proven. You can't prove that time itself does that. So the myth is being taught. Next, what special relativity actually says is clocks in relative motion tick at different rates when compared. And this is often taught as time itself slows down. This is a semantic and ontological leap, and it's also a myth. Special relativity makes statements about clock behavior and does not define or measure time itself. And that's contrary to what is taught. Students are taught the myth, which is false. So what is being taught is all the myths mentioned in part 1. And there's actually more than that than I mentioned in part 1. There's loads. So part 3. So how can we have a discussion between believers in relativity and disbelievers in relativity when most of the things we are told is relativity is a myth? And my answer is we can't. Mainstream then has a perfect defense which it uses for that. Why can't we discuss relativity without all these myths? And we can't. Mainstream has defined the ground for which we can argue, and the ground which we can argue, it's what is taught to physics students, and what is taught to physics students the myth, and which has got most believers in relativity believing, and most people who don't believe in relativity believing as well. So the ground from what we want to discuss thing is really about mythology, and we don't recognize what we're talking about is mythology. So you can't have a proper discussion. So part 4 is quietism. This is the defense the physics community uses. Now that they've created all these myths, this is their way of defending themselves. So I'm asking ChatGPT further questions about Einstein relativity, and it introduced me to the concept of quietism. Now, I never heard of that before, but it turns out to be an actual thing. Going off of ChatGPT a minute and going to Wikipedia, it tells you about quietism, and that must be one of the information sources that ChatGPT uses. So according to Wikipedia, quietism, you've got philosophical quietists who want to release humanity from the perplexity that philosophical contemplation often causes. So what happens is you've got philosophers and they're contemplating things, and it leads to confusion because you can't really work out what's going on. If you try to work out to yourself what is time itself, you can go off in lots of philosophical dead ends or go around in loops. So in order to try to escape from all those philosophical thinking, quietism was introduced by these quietists. So the quietist philosophers, contradiction now because they're philosophers, and they're philosophers and they're opposed to philosophy. Quietist philosophers believe that philosophy, that's philosophy other than the philosophy they have, has no positive thesis to contribute. Rather, it diffuses confusions in the linguistic and conceptual frameworks of other subjects, including non-quietist philosophy. So the quietist philosophy have this approach to philosophy which they disagree with. For quietists, advancing knowledge or settling debates, particularly between those who are realists and non-realists. And if you go into this issue of these mythologies, it is a conflict between people who think physics is realism and those people who think it's non-realism. And so Christopher Wright says the quietism is the view that significant metaphysical debate is impossible. So you're talking metaphysics, and the idea from quietism is you don't get anywhere talking about metaphysics. And to point out that realism is one metaphysical point of view and non-realism is another metaphysical view. So you want to apply quietism to that. I should have pointed out quietism, the idea you don't want to talk about it. So you've got this metaphysical debate between the realist and the non-realist, and the quietist, their point of view is don't talk about it. I'm jumping too far ahead now. Okay, getting back again. Right. So the question I asked to ChatGPT is quietism a real thing in science/physics? Because we're now extending ourselves that quietism has really been applied to all of science. It's not just been applied to physics. So it says, yes, quietism is a real and recognized stance in physics, though it's usually implicit rather than formally declared. It originates in philosophy, but it has real influence on how physics is practiced and taught. So my comment on that is, well, I've done a physics/maths degree, and the people who are teaching me, never pointed out to me that they were using quietism, and they kept quiet about it. And quietism is about keeping quiet about things. And so they don't even say that the philosophy they're working on is quietism, and they're keeping quiet about that. They're keeping quiet about everything. And it's just one of the numerous things those teaching me omitted to tell me that would have been useful to know. Anyway. So ChatGPT carries on and explains to me what quietism means in this context. Quietism is the view that certain questions, especially metaphysical or ontological ones, and ontological is about the nature of things, metaphysics is about things you can't get from experiments and so forth, should not be answered or are not meaningful to ask them at all. So their point of view is they don't want to talk about it, to keep quiet about it. In physics, quietism typically says things like, don't ask what reality is, only calculate predictions. So you're just concentrated on the mathematics, and you're wondering if that mathematics fits experiments. That's all you're doing. You're not asking the metaphysical questions which come on top of it. And so questions about what really exists are meaningless or unnecessary. And this is from the quietist point of view. If a concept doesn't change experimental outcomes, it's not physics. So they're trying to discard everything which they consider metaphysics and so forth from physics. And this is not anti-science, it is anti-metaphysics. Their point of view, the quietist point of view, is anti-metaphysics. And this is how we get the myths in. We get in one point of view of what the metaphysical interpretation of those experiments should be, and we're then not being allowed to talk about other metaphysical interpretations. Hence, we then get the myths. So this is where quietism enters science, mainly through philosophy. So it's the top person above, Einstein, and he was a philosopher, and he was famous for saying things, wherefore one cannot speak, therefore one must be silent. And so he's telling you not to speak about something. And so that's quietism. He influenced the idea that many deep questions are linguistic confusion, and the response is don't talk about them. Next person, this is a person where comes in via physics, and it's Ernest Mach. And he initially rejected atoms. In his time, atoms weren't observable. They were speculated, and there was no such thing really as atomic physics where you were doing experiments with atoms. So he rejected that idea as metaphysically nonsense. And so he rejected that as metaphysical excess along with space stroke time. And that is positivism. And so his early positivism influenced Einstein. So this is where Einstein is picking up this philosophy of quietism from. He's getting it from Ernst Mach, who influenced his way of doing physics. Next person is Niels Bohr. Niels Bohr had a big argument with Einstein over quantum mechanics, and the mainstream point of view is that Einstein lost that argument and Niels Bohr won it. And Niels Bohr is a quietist. He argued that quantum mechanics is about measurement outcomes, not underlying reality. So he is rejecting how to understand those experiments from metaphysics. So that's his approach to physics. He just wants you to do the mathematics and fit it to the experiments. That's all he wants you to do. And so they shaped a methodological quietism in physics. There's things you shouldn't talk about in physics and you should be quiet about it. That's quietism. So ChatGPT then goes on to tell me quietism in modern physics, how it shows up. Quietism isn't usually named. You don't even say that you're talking, you don't even say that you're using the philosophy of quietism. You keep quiet about things and you don't say that your philosophy is to keep quiet about those things. You don't even mention it. So for number one, special relativity, typical quietist stances, there's no fact of the matter about absolute simultaneity or absolute motion. And that's the operationalist version, another philosophy, operationalism. Only clock readings and measurements matter. So you're just concentrating on that. And asking what time really is meaningless. So you're just concentrating on clock readings. And so what they've done then is they've defined those clock readings as being time, contrary to the previous point of view before that, where time was not just clock readings. So that they've messed up the definitions of time. And so ChatGPT is responding to me now. Your long-standing concern about Einstein's metaphysical slide from method to ontology fits exactly here. So I've done other talks where I've dealt with the metaphysics, and ChatGPT is commenting my point of view on these things. So my note is, so quietism is applied to the myth mentioned earlier. You've got the myth created and that's it. That is, you're not allowed to question those myths. You just keep quiet about it. And that approach to physics is then extends from relativity into quantum physics. You're using quietism in relativity, and it got extended then into quantum physics as well. And as I say, I think all of science has been affected by this quietism. So number two, we're getting on to quantum mechanics. And so the dominant point of view there, which is often cited in textbook, is shut up and calculate. So they don't want you to try to understand what the mathematics you're doing means in a physical sense. And so you've got things like the wave function, you could raise a question, is it real or just information? And the reply from quietism, don't ask. You're not supposed to deal with that question. Keep quiet about it. And next question is, does the particle exist before measurement? And that's like the Schrödinger cat thing. And that response from quietism is, it's a meaningless question, don't ask it. And so what collapses is the wave function is supposed to collapse when you're making a measurement. And so the question of what collapses, and the formalism doesn't say. So you're not supposed to ask the question. Quietism says don't ask the question. just keep quiet. And this is an ontological absence, not neutrality. It's not, quietism is not neutral. It is just blocking any questions about ontology, which is the nature of things. So my question is, I want to blame Einstein for everything. And so this is what inspired my next question. I've already pointed out to you that Mach influenced Einstein's way of thinking, and that was his early thinking. And so I'm thinking, well, Einstein must have introduced quietism into physics. So I asked the question, did Einstein start quietism in physics? Question mark. And the short answer from ChatGPT is no. Einstein did not start quietism in physics, but he accidentally enabled it and later explicitly opposed it. So Einstein is an enabler. He enabled quietism to take over physics, and he did it by accident. He was working from Ernst Mach, and Ernst Mach, you have quietism, and Einstein kind of enabled that to take over the rest of physics. So this below is a precise, historically grounded explanation that separates cause, enablement, and responsibility. Number one, quietism existed before Einstein. Quietism in physics originates prior to 1905. 1905 is when Einstein came out with all his famous papers on relativity and so forth, and it mainly came from Ernst Mach. And Ernst Mach was late 19th century positivism, and he was anti-metaphysical reactions to Newtonian absolute space and time. That was his point of view. He was opposing absolute space and time, and he was coming at it from positivism. I need to make this screen a bit bigger so I can see the rest of it. Here we go. So Mach explicitly argued that only sensations / observables are legitimate. So he wanted physics based only upon things you could observe. So unobservables are metaphysical excess, and as I pointed out at his time, atoms were only speculation. They were not doing experiments involving atoms. That really came a bit later. So he was treating atoms as metaphysical excess. It's just speculation. It was also imposed to other things we considered unobservable, like ether, absolute time, and other things as well. So quietism was already a live doctrine before Einstein wrote anything. Number two, what Einstein actually did and did not do. What Einstein did do, he used operational definitions for clocks, rods, and synchronization of the clocks. And he rejected the ether as unnecessary. And that was in 1905. In his first paper, 1905, he rejected it. Later, he changed his mind and said other things about ether. He seemed to be bringing it back. And it's all like he didn't reject it as meaningless, but he just rejected it as unnecessary. So that's the point. There's a difference between unnecessary and meaningless. And next, he minimized metaphysics for methodological economy. I'm not quite sure about that. It doesn't sound quite right with me. He seemed to be bringing in lots of metaphysics in my point of view. And this made his work compatible with quietism, but not identical to it. So his work is to a extent compatible with quietism in 1905. What Einstein did not do, he did not claim ontology is illegitimate. So he did not claim that talking about ontology is something you shouldn't do. Ontology is about the nature of things. So he was not banning you from talking about the nature of things. He did not claim reality is observer dependent. That came later with quantum mechanics. He did not say physics is only about measurements and that still comes later with quantum mechanics. These are later additions. So things he did not say, those three things there, that came later. He started quietism, and then you had extra things added on top of it. So who actually institutionalized quietism? And quietism became dominant through others, not Einstein. And the channels were philosophical, such as via the Vienna Circle, and it's coming via logical positivism, and then the philosophy of operationalism in the philosophy of science. And the physics channel it was coming through was Niels Bohr and his Copenhagen interpretation, which he brought into quantum mechanics. That sounds very much, that is very much like quietinist doctrine. So, and it was aided by that by Heisenberg. And so the point of view from that is to shut up and calculate. And so Bohr's position is explicit quietism, and that's what's been imposed upon physics. And physics concerns what we can say, not what is. And Einstein rejected this. He did not want to go along with that. He opposed Niels Bohr, who brought in all this quietism. So this is about Einstein's later reversal, because he starts off in 1905 with a type of quietist doctrine, and in 1920s he seems to start going against that idea. From the 1920s onward, Einstein attacks positivism directly, and that was what his early 1905 writings were based upon. He was influenced by the positivism of Mach, and he went against that philosophy, and he rejects Mach's philosophy. He was originally going by what Mach was saying, and then later he rejected it in the 1920s onwards, and he insists on ontology and realism. So he's insisting that should be what physics is. It should be dealing with realism, and it should be dealing with issues of what the nature of reality is. And he criticizes quantum quietism relentlessly. So what you got is from Niels Bohr, you brought in quietism for this quantum mechanics, and Niels Bohr was very influential in that regard in beating Einstein, and so modern physics is based upon quietism. So his famous reversal is saying something like, it is a theory which decides what we can observe. And that's supposed to be anti-quietist to the core, according to ChatGPT. But I don't totally agree with that. I don't quite understand what that quote is supposed to mean. I could dissect that further. Next. So, next issue is why Einstein still gets explained. I have to go back and see if I jumped over the... No, I'm all right. This is the issue. Next is why Einstein still gets blamed. And the three reasons is rhetorical legacy. His early language was operational and minimalist. So in 1905, he was starting this way of dealing with physics from what we now call as quietism. And next one is number 2, pedagogical simplification. Textbooks throws method into metaphysics. So what Einstein was doing in 1905, they're frozen into the way the textbooks are to deal with physics in these terms of this metaphysics, which was then further elaborated on by Niels Bohr. So they're going by Einstein 1905, and they're not going by Einstein in his 1920s onwards. They're going by the early Einstein and not going by the older Einstein. Number 3 is the success of relativity, and that is the success of the 1905 part, not the 1920s things that Einstein was saying. So quietists claim Einstein as their patron saint. So he's the one who started it in 1905, even though he went against it. But Einstein himself publicly disavowed positivism, and he regretted Mach's influence, and he rejected Bohr's philosophy. So Einstein, the older Einstein, rejects all of it, rejects all of quietism and all the associated stuff. But in his early days, 1905, he's sort of like enabling it. He becomes the saint from his early times. Early Einstein is a patron saint of quietism, although Einstein isn't. So the one sentence summary, Einstein did not start quietism in physics. He provided tools that quietists later misused. They misused their tools, then spent the rest of his life arguing against them. My comment is AI has made me aware of these issues. I was not really aware of these issues until AI brought it to my attention in these terms. I was not aware of this thing called quietism. I mean, they kept quiet to me about quietism. Quietism is about keeping quiet. And so they didn't tell me this in my physics education. It was only via using artificial intelligence that it's come to my attention. So there are lots of myths said about special relativity, and artificial intelligence does not consider that to be proper special relativity. It's the myths added on which are the things that are wrong, but it considers there's a proper relativity without the myths. But those myths are what is taught, and hence why most people think that is special relativity. Most people's view of special relativity is to believe the myths, and the myths, well, they're just false from the ChatGPT's point of view. Then the physics community responds by quietism, meaning they want to be quiet and not go into discussion about these myths. Then they do the same thing with quantum physics by making myths there and going quiet about them. So I actually have asked about quantum physics from ChatGPT, even though my focus has been on relativity, and the same thing is happening there. You're having a vast amount of myths. In the case of Einstein's relativity, it has pointed out to me 50 myths for special relativity. Finished. Thank you. That's the end. Let's get back to arguing then. So if I can come back on full screen and put myself back on. No, what's going on here? Add stage. Oh, there I am. So if I can make myself bigger. There. Hello, everybody. So I'm back again. Hopefully you heard my talk. I've not seen any comments in the private chat saying they haven't heard me. So, or anybody breaking in saying they haven't heard me from the green room. Unfortunately, I've had this intermittent cough and my voice seems to come and go. So what we got? Any hands in the green room? Nobody's got a hand up. I think most of them are asleep as per usual. With these issues, not everybody is really interested in them. They're sort of like, well, the big issue with physics, in my view, is why has it gone wrong? And my investigations of AI, ChatGPT, has revealed to me things about physics which they just kept quiet about when they taught me physics. And this idea that the philosophy that the mainstream is going by is quietism explains a lot. They keep quiet about things and they keep quiet about what philosophy they're going about. So that explains a lot. When people from the dissident community then try to get published in mainstream journals, well, they're not going to respond to that. They're just going to keep quiet about it. They're just going to reject the paper and keep quiet about why. So I'll go back to the public comments now because I've had the private chat comments up now. I don't think the people on YouTube and so forth see the private comments. Oh, so let's go back to the beginning and then see what we got here. Oh, well, it goes back a long way, so it goes back. Oh, right. So And that's the first one. I would like to say I corrected Einstein. Well, he's wrong, but I wrote a paper and that corrected the field equations. But you probably got the same problem with, it depends what direction you're coming from. If you're believing if you're from a respectable mainstream point of view, or you're going for a distant point of view. If you're going against the mainstream point of view, then they're just going to use quietism on you. So what else has he got? So they corrected them all. But yeah, Kepler, well, that's going back a long way, isn't it? Kepler, going back to Kepler. I don't think much from Kepler has come forward. It's only keeping the three laws that came from Kepler. So presumably maybe he means the three laws that Kepler came up with, which doesn't agree with. So there's no entropy. Well, it's not really to do with my talk about myths and so forth. Yeah, well, they can see more of the universe, I suppose. Everyone knows how it gets larger. Well, at least they see more of the universe if they get a more powerful telescope. Pause a minute while I finish my cup of tea. It's getting a bit cold. Right. Hopefully that repairs my voice. So looking now in the green room. No, I think they're all still asleep. Bless them. Right. Can't use. So I have a propulsion system that can get us to the center of the galaxy in 1 second. Well, let's pass on that. It wasn't about my myth. So moving down, talking about other things here. George James, he's given his theories. Let's see what this other person says. So Toby says, so before E equals MC squared, Einstein recognized the ether. It's 1905 that he's saying in his paper on special relativity that the ether is superfluous, and before 1905 he was considering the idea. I don't know how far he got with that. So he came up with special relativity, and that seemed to be taken as the way he's doing things. And it's not what he says in 1905 is what the mainstream have adopted, and not what he says later. So the early Einstein they've taken on, and not the later Einstein. After his theory of relativity for 16 years, he did not accept the ether. And so then for the rest of his life, he accepted that physics needed the ether. Well, what he actually says about the ether, the older Einstein, the one after from 1920s onwards, it's very confusing what he's talking about. Anyway, pass on that. Shockwave says, faster than light travel is deadly. Run into a grain of sand at the speed it would result in disaster. Yeah, presumably. From the mythologies of relativity, you can't go faster than light speed. But I think it's just a myth, just another myth they tell you. Okay. Fly through a cloud of plasma, it will erode your ship away. So going into Star Trek territory, I don't know. At faster than light speed, you are no longer in the physical universe. No grains of sand will be in the way, and that's Star Trek stuff again, I think. So interesting equation. He says there is no ether because of that equation. Don't know. Another version. So what's it? 3:10, not really getting on to what my talk is about at the moment. 2 means 2-dimensional motion, add 1 to 3. That's where math is. Pass. Don't know. Let's try to move on. I'm talking about dimensions now. And then somebody brings up, what's this? What is that symbol? And I haven't used that in my talk, so it's completely off topic. So they're just talking about their own theories, theorizing at the moment. And that's getting up to 3:15 in the comments. So I'm trying to move on. It's an interesting comment. So after all this theorizing they're doing in the comments, it's sort of like, I feel like Alice in Wonderland with that's because I tried to point out all the myths that have been added to physics via Einstein enabling it. It's difficult to find anything. We've got Rupert Sheldrake now. Let's see what he says. Show. Rupert. Show. Come on. Right. So Toby says, Rupert Sheldrake in Hospital book, Science Set 3, Chapter 3, Are the Laws of Physics Fixed? ? Page 93 notes that over the years, measurements of the speed of light changed between 1928 and 1945. Yeah. They had a lot of trouble measuring light speed. So what happens with Einstein is you're defining the one-way light speed to be constant, and you're then setting your clocks to conform to that. And so that is then called the Einstein synchronization of clocks. But actually, you can synchronize clocks in different ways. This comment is probably this. Toby says, yeah, I asked ChatGPT to make a list of 10 things wrong with relativity and got a list of 10 things. Roger is right. Yeah. So you ask the right question and you get a decent answer. So Toby notes that I am right about that. You've got to ask the right questions to ChatGPT. If you're new to ChatGPT and just ask it, is relativity correct? It will take the official mainstream point of view and say yes. But then you've got to ask it further questions and it will explain to you things that it considers wrong about relativity, which then contradicts the answer when it said it was correct. So it's just parroting the mainstream when it says mainstream is correct. When it says relativity is correct, it's just parroting the mainstream. You've got to interrogate it a bit further and find out what it has, what its point of view is on relativity. And it considers relativity as that core thing I told you. It's based upon mathematics, which fit with experiments. And it says that part of it is correct. But then all the other things added on top of it, which it calls the myths, that stuff is wrong. So you've got the core bit of relativity, and it says that bit is right. It's all the extra things that people have added, which is wrong. And so that's where you get it to then admit to what people are saying about relativity is wrong. And it's what people are taught is relativity. Humans, have been taught relativity, and according to ChatGPT, that is wrong. They're being taught something which is not relativity. So you've got to interrogate ChatGPT correctly to get this story, this narrative of what it's considering relativity to be. Just asking it a question, is relativity correct? It's going to not tell you the full story of what relativity is. That is being taught wrong to students. So, anyway, somebody else is saying chat GTP is not good. But that's if you ask it the wrong questions, basically. You've got to ask it the right questions to get to the core issues. Can take you can take an erroneous idea to AI and get the right review. I disagree. If you're not talking to ChatGPT correctly, you can get things that are wrong. You can say, what you got to get into is what is the point of view that it's working from. If you got an answer, it says one thing or the other, you got to say what point of view is that based upon to get better clarification about that. So it will tell you if you ask it. If it's telling you something, something I don't you think, oh, that's really weird what you're saying. You can ask it then, does that agree with what the mainstream believes from their point of view? And it will say yes or no. It will be clear on that. If you're coming at ChatGPT and saying, I believe so and so, I believe in that so and so, work out the consequences of all that, and it will work out the consequences of what you believe. But you've got to ask it, is this considered correct from the mainstream point of view? Does this conform to experiments and questions like that to get clarification upon what you're saying to it to form a theory on, to say whether it's right or wrong. So you've got to ask the right questions. So you can get it to say things that are wrong, but only because you're biased and asking it specifically to give wrong answers. Right. No, you have to have the right idea to correct AI investigation. Well, you ask it if you got a theory, and you plug it into AI. You can ask it whether it conforms to experiment, so you can find out from that. You find out the point of view from AI, and you can ask it, does that point of view agree with the mainstream, or does it agree with some alternative physics point of view, and so forth. So you can find that information. It does not have the capacity to correct the wrong idea. No, you can. If you say something to ChatGPT and it comes back to you that it's right, or it comes back to you and says it's wrong, and if it comes back and tells you it's wrong, you can ask it what needs to be done to make the idea correct. So you can give its point of view on how to correct a wrong idea. So, and as example in my talk just now, I asked it, forget the precise words I'd asked it, did Einstein introduce quietism into physics? And it disagreed with that, and it said instead that he enabled it. So it does give you useful information. Einstein did not give quietism to physics. Quietism in physics was there before Einstein. He just enabled it. So that is something precise. It is correcting a question. It's saying no, that wasn't it. If you allow it, it will correct things. So AI does not and cannot enlighten TPO to the correct direction. Don't understand what TPO is. They've been meant to. But I agree. OST of science is myth. Probably means most of science is a myth. Yeah, and yeah, that's correct. So AI is able to point out to you that most of science, most of the things that the popularizers of science say that's all just mythology. And what it's taught to physics students, what most of it is myth. Believe it's faith because it's wrong is a belief of false faith. That's quite science can become like a religion. It claims people believe things about science, and then it's replacing religious belief. Anyway, amazing how many atheists have beliefs. So most atheists, those who don't believe in the Bible, the Quran, or whatever, they sort of like appeal to science. So science then takes on the job of that religion, and they don't like it being opposed. You would be more accurate to believe in Santa Claus. Well, it was supposed to mean a real person who died, wasn't it? That Santa Claus was based upon somebody, Saint Christopher or something. Saint gets corrupted into being called Santa and so forth. Anyway, some math equations, and there's comment. Einstein's wrong. Yeah, but the problem with that is a lot of myths have been added to relativity. So you've got the core bit about relativity, and then you've got all the myths added onto it. So saying Einstein is wrong, it's what part of it is wrong. Einstein, 1905, seems to go against the idea of ether. In 1920, he seems to be wanting to bring the ether back. It's very confusing what he says. So there's a clash between what the early Einstein was saying and what the older Einstein was saying. So when you say Einstein is wrong, it's sometimes, do you mean the early Einstein or the older Einstein? Let's see. Yeah. So the only thing, especially that Einstein got right, is equals mc squared. The only thing that is right is equals mc squared, and that comes from Einstein. The phi equation, because it's pure wave, but he got that from Tinto di Pretto. So Einstein is supposed to have heard about that equation. Einstein's famous for the equation E equals mc squared, but he's supposed to, some people theorize, get it from an earlier science paper. So it wasn't really originating with him. So what truly original correct for Einstein? None really. Don't know. Some of the things he's saying are correct, so some of the things he's saying are wrong. So sort of a mix and max. But he was definitely, Einstein was definitely working for Mach. So maybe Einstein was getting this information about E equals mc squared from Mach as well. People don't really know where Einstein's getting this information from because he's not citing sources. So Toby says, correction, Einstein denied the ether for only 11 years. And so that's supposed to be correcting something we said earlier, I suppose. So Einstein, 1905, seemed to be rejecting the ether in his first paper in special relativity. That gets interpreted as a rejection, even though he was just saying it was superfluous, and he didn't say that it should be rejected. That's not add on to that 1916. So 11 years on to that 1916. I don't know whether he was saying the ether existed that 11 years later, but the 1920s, he seemed to be talking about some ether or something like an ether. Okay, I had a physics professor, this is George say, I had a physics professor, hand on the wall pushing, and asked, can you imagine a force without acceleration? I said, no. Pushing the wall, he asked, where is it? Aha. Yeah, it's absorbed into the atom somehow or other. Okay. And George said, I said your heart is accelerating to maintain it. So there's a force on the heart. Okay. Next. Come on. Green Science 101. I checked AI and it said there are no official modern sea independent measurements of distance. There's no, I think what you mean is one-way speed of light measurements, and those one-way speed of light measurements which they try to do end up just arguing about. And so they're saying light parallax between bodies in the SS. What's in the SS? But amateur astronomers use the parallax method all the time. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, but the mainstream, when you try to do a one-way speed of light measurement, it ends up in a lot of arguments, I think. So AI screen says there's no major differences in the distance found via parallax or sea dependent measurements like laser or radar ranging. So George says Einstein is wrong, forget the slide. Doesn't say which particular slide. It sounds geography like ignore the slides really. And so Shockwave says quantum particles is fantasy. It's probably metaphysics really. Green Science 101 says, however, if there are variations in C through the SS or over time, then maybe they are within experimental errors. I don't know what SS is supposed to be. There's a comment. There's a comment. George is finally getting on to what my talk has been about. Quietism is very European. I don't really know. Came from somewhere. I think it was applied to religious debate originally. They didn't want you to ask certain questions. Keep quiet about it. And you can sort of like say, well, look at the Bible and say, ask questions like about these stories in the Bible and ask questions about so and so, and maybe the response is keep quiet about that. Look at Galileo. Yeah. So Shockwave says when you slam massive amounts of energy into a particle, it will return to ether, the realm of the photon. Okay. Don't know. George says physics is independent, I think, of observer. And I don't think that's quite correct. It's not the way physics is treated. You got all these sort of things added to physics about how people are going to interpret things. So you got the basic thing, you do experiment and see what you observe, and then you try to form the maths around it, and then you got the problem of well, how you're going to interpret what that means, and so that's all human invention. Comment here. George says Einstein is wrong. Who is right? Nobody's right. Everybody's wrong. Well, There you go. So Shockwave says, I have an issue using the term myth. Before 1850s, myth meant history. I don't know if that's correct. Has the word myth changed its meaning? I don't know. When you look at history, you don't really know. When they give historical account, you don't really know precisely what happened. You just got the record of something happened, say like JFK got shot, and then you got a record to say we think it was Lee Harvey Oswald and other stuff like that. And they say, do we know 100% sure that that's what happened? And there's stories about, oh, there's somebody else behind the grassy knoll, and it's sort of like you end up with the extra bits where you don't really know what if that fits into the narrative. Myth is living on the wrong axioms. Something like that, it can be. So, now myth means fake news. I don't know if they're taking that point of view in the mainstream media. So, no, you're living a lie, not a myth. The problem is the term lie. It can sort of like plug you into a lie detector and ask you questions. But if the person they're asking question to, if he believes the lie, then from his point of view, he's telling the truth. So you got truth relative to yourself, truth relative to other people. And so you could take a point of view where you definitely know what the truth is, and then you tell a lie. And you've got another point of view, well, you actually believe the lie. So from your point of view, you're not telling a lie. You've got all this complicated interaction things going on. No, myth to me means history, not lies. But myth is usually a collection of things that are false and a collection of things that are wrong, but in my view. Most societies live on myth, probably. It's storytelling a lot of time. Myths is storytelling you tell other people. So you have a degree on myths. I think a lot of people are being taught myths when they're going to do their science degree. They're being taught myths, but they're not being told that it's myth. They're being told. Okay. No wonder aliens don't show up. I don't know what the aliens want. They may just be interested in watching us as a spectator sport or something, seeing us all kill ourselves. Or they might be experimenting on us or whatever. Who knows what the aliens want? But you can get front row seats on the madness. So, yeah, maybe the aliens are watching us as their entertainment. Who knows? So, yeah. So Shotway says, I never attended college or uni. He says, E.T. is not real. There's a film on it. Steven Spielberg made a film about E.T. It's a real film. Okay. George says, why has it gone wrong? What do you mean, science? It's just gone wrong. It's just sort of like got messed up from what Einstein did. I remember all the Stooty Nose kids I went to school with. Yeah. What else about that? Thanks for introducing us to scientific realism. Yeah, it was new to me. I didn't know there was such a thing called quietism. And quietism is the philosophy idea, keep quiet about certain things, don't talk about it. And nobody told me there was quietism, so they kept quiet about that as well. It's about keeping quiet about things. And so it explains a lot, quietism. That means that explains why the mainstream goes quiet when the dissident physicists turn up. When we got all different points of view about physics, their response is to keep quiet. They don't want to talk about it. Right, that's quietism. So this going a bit off topic here about there's a next thing I clicked on in cart. There's a force can be speed times mass rate, like fluid from the hose. And normally it's talked about as mass times acceleration. Anyway, next. It's an invention of the CIA to hide Tesla's work on anti-gravity with Tom Townsend Brown. Okay, bit off topic. Into conspiracy theories there. Thank you for, or it might be discussion. Thank you for this enlightened discussion. It may be the discussion between the people he's chatting to on the comments, or not necessarily what I put on screen for my talk about myths. So Joseph says, as usual, there's a lot about the flaws of special relativity, a lot about Einstein, and as usual, little to show for it. If you don't know if he's referring to my talk. If the current special relativity is wrong, then an alternative theory is needed. I've created such a theory, and it can be found on academia.edu. Now, and then, as I was trying to point out, that the response from the mainstream is to go quiet. So if you've got a different theory, they want to go quiet about it, is the usual response. Unless that's if you're a dissident, you're not got if you're an academic and you've got prestige, then maybe they'll take you a bit more seriously and look at what you're saying. But if you're outside of the mainstream, they're just going to usually go quiet about it and not talk about it. That's their response. So Shotway says, no, Roger, faster than light will be possible, but it will end in disaster. And that's not really what my talk was about. But, Stephen Gift says, Sorelli's transformations, that's his pet theory. He prefers Sorelli transformations to other things. Reproduce or experimentally verified predictions of special relativity while eliminating relativity or simultaneity, reciprocal length, and causality violation. Yeah, I think ChatGPT points out that sort of thing, that you can have different transformations and you can have different simultaneity. And that's what I was trying to point out, is it is one of the myths. If the people who believe in special relativity too much believe that there's only relative simultaneity and so forth. So then they believe that the only transformation is the Lorentz transformations. So that's some of the myths that the mainstream believe. Their mythology is they believe things contrary to what you're saying there. And when you sort of like bring up those issues about the Sorelli transformations, their sort of response would be to go quiet, use quietism. Yeah. So next one, Stephen Giff, fast and light signals result in causality violations in special relativity. Ooh. Well, that's a big issue as well. Interrogated ChatGPT about that, and it's sort of how do you interpret the Lorentz transformation when you're having speed greater than c? And part of the issue is, well, maybe you should use a different equation. I mean, the equation they got breaks down at speed c. So does that mean that you can't go at speed c? Or does it mean that you should stop using that equation and use a different equation? I've asked a lot of questions to ChatGPT about that. So special relativity doesn't necessarily mean that you can't go faster than light. It just means that there is a myth that it's interpreted that way without wanting to accept that there could be different interpretations. So Shockwave says, I like Jim's comment about Albert in Wonderland. Yeah, so Albert, one of the attractive things about Einstein's relativity is that it introduces us to this wonderful wonderland of talking about simultaneity, space and time. You can go fast and you end up in the fantasy realm with Star Trek and so forth, where if you go fast and the speed of light, you can travel back in time. If you do all these things, you can do a space warp or black holes. You can travel to a different universe and loads of weird stuff. So it introduces you to a wonderful fantasy land, and it's not really backed up by the mathematics. It's just the way they want to believe what the mathematics means. So Jim says, does mainstream still accept his two? Not in a, without question. Well, Einstein in 1905 gave us two postulates, and his theory is supposed to be built upon that. And I think that's normally what is taught to physics students, that it comes from his two postulates. But when you sort of like interrogate ChatGPT more about it, it thinks that the elite, the ones who actually work with relativity in theorizing, they think there's a bit more to it than just that. They will add extra things to it. So special relativity in 1905, and then they built upon that and they added more to it. So I don't know if they accept it without question. They can interpret it different ways. Camera speeds can measure the speed of light with the hugely high speeds of their frame rates. Pass. Don't know. Next. Shockwave says, ask the ChatGPT, Roger, about the changed meaning of myths. Yeah, that's something else I should look into. See if the word myth has changed its meaning. As far as I'm aware, it didn't. So Shockwave says, the meaning of myth that originally meant our history. Over the years, it has changed to falsehoods. Well, when you look at history, there can be things that are covered up, so that can make history a bit false. Okay. T was for your discussion. Enlightened. That probably means thank you for your discussion. So maybe he was enlightened a bit, because the quietism, as an interesting idea in my view, is totally new to me. So it lets you know how the mainstream treats us dissidents. They go quiet. Yeah. Hey, Roger. So I said, Jurgen, probably Jurgen. Hey, Roger, like the way you are thinking lately. Yeah. Influenced a lot by the things I'm finding out from ChatGPT. Because I say, you don't have to believe ChatGPT, but it's an interesting for collecting information, and it's introducing me to information I didn't know about before, like quietism. And us dissidents, we haven't been aware that this philosophy of quietism is being used against us. We didn't know that it had a name. And I think the mainstream don't even realize that they're using quietism. So it's a discovery to me that the mainstream uses quietism. and it's probably something new to the mainstream. They don't even talk about it to realise that that's what they're doing. Amazing. Next, we go. Although be warned, ChatGPT is not very smart unless you torture it. It's difficult to torture. People have pointed out to me in the past that when I've talked to people that would have been very good working for the Spanish Inquisition, where I could torture them with the thumb screws and so forth, get them to confess and give me an answer, give me a straight answer without lying to me. And I'm sort of like using those skills on artificial intelligence. I find human intelligence, HI, but load of rubbish, human intelligence, they try to lie. If you talk to them, they'll try lying just to tell you what they want. But with artificial intelligence, well, it just chucks out information it's gathered from other sources, and you can interrogate that and you say, look at that and see what's going on. And so it will tell you things from different points of view, and that is very useful to me. And so I contrast that point of view with another point of view with another point of view and say, well, you then make up your own mind. So but as torturing it, I don't see that I can actually do that. I don't know how to apply thumb screws to it. You can point out sometimes if it says something which is contradictory, maybe that tortures it. If it says yes to one answer, and then you go through a long line of questions, and then eventually it wants to say the opposite answer, you can interrogate, maybe that tortures it. When it said yes and later wants to say no to that first question, maybe that's torture to it. But a lot of the time you can't have absolutes. You can't have an absolute yes, you can't have an absolute no. Normally it's you give an answer, I said yes, and there's a load of conditions associated with saying yes. If I say no, there's a load of conditions associated with I say no. And so when you get ChatGPT, you say yes, and you get that down further, ask it 10 questions, and it wants to give the opposite answer and say no, it will say, well, the first time I said yes, I had these sort of conditions attached to that. And now I'm saying no, there's other conditions that are attached to it. So it's like a good liar. If you can catch a human being lying, they will try to come up with excuses. They say, well, yeah, I said so such time because I made a mistake and I believed it. But now thinking about it, I was wrong. So they try to, it's no absolutes. People have different, they have all their different excuses to try to defend themselves. And ChatGPT does the same. If you ask, so go back to relativity. If you ask ChatGPT about relativity, it say it's correct, but then you interrogate it and you say, well, what it believes is relativity is different to what physics students are being taught as relativity. So it's believing something different to humans. The AI version of relativity is not the same as the human version of relativity. AI relativity and HI relativity, they're different things. Oh. But you got to interrogate it. You got to go through those questions to find out that what it believes is relativity is not the same as what a human being believes is relativity. So it's brilliant. Brilliant. It's brilliant. You find out all these new things, and you've got the advantage then. If it was a human being, they'd probably be dead by all the torture instruments you've used on it by then. By when it's got said one thing and it's gone down further and said the opposite. With a human being, well, they would have probably died in the process. But with AI, no. It will change its, say something different answer, but it will give an excuse. So it's managed to survive the interrogation process, unlike a human who's probably died in the torture before you get it to say one thing and say the opposite. So brilliant. AI, it's sort of like you can torture this thing. Well, you can ask it, interrogate it forever, and it'll tell you more and more stuff. And eventually, AI gets to the point where it says it doesn't know. It doesn't know. You ask it questions, don't know the answer to that question. Brilliant. Right, so next question. Right, Jürgen. So there is, Jürgen says there is only local simultaneity in special relativity. Well, that's probably an issue to argue about. Simultaneity in special relativity is very confusing. As I try to point out, that it seems to be dependent upon how you do clock synchronization. And if you do the synchronization in different ways, you're affecting the simultaneity. So who's this one? Shockwave. Shockwave's an interactive database, that's all. So I don't know what that's supposed to mean. So what do you mean you're not accepting? What you're not accepting about it? It's not a human, it's artificial intelligence. So the word artificial is a clue. It's telling you it's not what a human would consider intelligent. It's an artificial version of it. Sort of, if you get some food, there's proper food, like, you can buy something like butter. That's butter. That's proper butter. Or you can have an imitation of butter, artificial butter. So it's the same thing. You got the real butter and you got the artificial one, or anything else which they make. There's loads of things around which are artificial. So you can either have the real thing, the original real thing, or you can have an imitation of it. And it's not really thinking. It's not doing what we humans do. It's trying to imitate what we do. So it's all artificial. So it's better at collecting all these different information sources than I am at collecting them. I didn't even know there was this thing out there called quietism, and it managed to bring this out to me. Jürgen says, before and after relationships are only on the light cones or slower eyes of relativity. Go back. Don't want to go to that. Okay. The simultaneity they're talking about beyond that is just nonsense. There's different types of simultaneity. Next. Jürgen, no more physical than saying my nose is actually factually 3 units of length west of the origin. Don't know. Lost me. It's getting too abstract. Physical simultaneity is about local causal before and after relationships. To get absolute simultaneity free of coordinate dependence means causation going infinitely fast, which might be true in the real world. At least as a limit, but in special relativity, there's no such thing as global simultaneity physically. That's if you're using the synchronization that Einstein wants you to use. Only theories with unbounded causal speed can weed that out of local, that word, causal before and after relationship. So, next. That is. And so Jürgen, I think he's talking about AI. It's really good at finding references as well. It found some obscure sources for me I couldn't find myself. Yeah. It sometimes gives fake references. Where it did in the early days. I think it's better now. I think I do have interrogated about references, and then I had to go through the references to make sure they are real references. And sometimes it will just create stuff, make stuff up. Well, that's what people have said. They just make stuff up. Rather than say, I don't know, as a normal person might say, AI, instead of saying, don't know, sometimes just make stuff up. So you got to be careful. Sorry, you had to have a shower. SS equals solar system. And I always think of the Nazis in Germany. That's SS as far as I know. And so, after my shower experiment, I can confirm that force equals speed times mass flow rate. Okay. Sorry for the abstraction. It's a bit obscure without explaining it in a bit more detail. This business of simultaneity as convention versus as physically meaningful. The problem is the clock synchronization is a convention. And so based upon that clock synchronization, Einstein wants you to do the synchronization his way, the Einstein way of synchronizing clocks. But there's lots of different ways you can synchronize clocks. And so depending on how you synchronize clocks is an effect on what simultaneity is. You can have absolute simultaneity, relative simultaneity, and loads of other different kinds as well in between. And so it's a convention which is then leading on to making simultaneity and such a thing. So it's a consequence of a convention. Okay. Oh, I think I've got through them now. So I've got through all the existing comments. So there you go. And it looks like everybody's still asleep in the green room. Nobody's awake. Nobody. Oh, Dennis. Hello, Dennis. Might be Dennis wants to talk. I had him up. Hello, Dennis. How are you?
Hi, Roger. Why don't you feed this talk to AI and have it write a book on it for you and then publish it on Kindle Direct Publishing, which is free.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm not really keen in going into publishing anymore. Well, I have published lots of things in the past, and they just seem to get ignored by people. And so, putting things on video, putting it on the internet as a video, it sort of like gets more attention. I think, anyway. But most of the things that I've written get ignored. So just be something else to get ignored, because when a physicist, mainstream physicist, is my view, talks about physics, that they look around and say, where's the physics papers? And they look for the physics papers, and they take that on board with what they're saying. But then they say, oh, that paper's philosophy. Oh, I'm not interested in that. So if you write a paper about quietism, they say, what's that? It's philosophy. I'm not interested in looking at that. So they're just applying quietism basically to other things. So they're not looking at these things.
Well, you could title it Chat GPT looks at special relativity.
Yeah,
I think you might if you publish it as a Kindle book or as a paperback, you'd earn some money, and it's free, and you get royalties.
Yeah, I go to physics conferences, and at the moment I'm going to one, and I did do AI looks at special relativity last year at Oxford University, and that's online. And the response from that was to be quiet. Okay, quietism was applied to that talk. So, and next year I'm hoping. No, sorry, this year now. I'm still thinking of 2025. This year, 2026, I booked a conference in London, physics conference in London, where I'm talking about AI applied to special relativity. And there's another conference in November, I think I'm looking at. We are going to talk about a similar thing. I'm talking about AI applied to relativity. So
if I may say so, your delivery is not that convincing. You have to listen carefully to what you say in order to get the message. However, in the case of a book, especially if it's authored by Chat GPT, after you feed it this talk, it'll rule out all the redundancies and the other problems you have in your delivery. It'll be very smooth. Very convincing. And it's free. And AI will do it for you.
Well, most of what I've given is what a ChatGPT has told me, and it's
Yeah,
with my
but
comments.
you pointed out that you've got to torture ChatGPT. Most people don't realize that.
Sorry,
You
sorry, I
pointed
can't
out
hear.
that you have to torture ChatGPT in order to get straight answers. Most people don't.
You've got to interrogate it. You've got to interrogate it because the first ChatGPT, I try to explain. If you ask ChatGPT, is Einstein's relativity correct? It will say yes, it's right. And so that's as far as many people will go. But you've got to then interrogate it to find out.
Yeah, see, the people don't know that.
Don't they?
But if you published a book like that and had AI write it so the delivery was really smooth, and it would be free, and it would be much more convincing, I think, because AI is so smooth.
I'm not totally convinced by AI.
Well, no, you shouldn't
Just
be.
saying a talk. I like to add my comments to what's being said. So if I feed into ChatGPT my comments plus the things it's saying and ask it to smooth it out, then what will come back is something that I would not actually say myself. I prefer to say
you could recycle it. The first time it comes out with a few problems, you can mention those problems and have it rewrite the thing until it's good as far as you'd like it.
No, I don't. Well, I don't see that. I always disagree with some things that are being said.
Well, you just keep pounding it until it comes up with something that you can agree with.
I don't know. I prefer disagreeing. If it's something 100% agreement with me, I get scared. If I talk to a human being, and you have a dialogue, and if I come away believing 100% of what they've said to me, then I'm scared that I've been tricked. And so that's my prejudice.
You could mention that to AI too, and it would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I get what I'm scared of is salesmen, and if a salesman, when they try to sell you something, if you come away believing it all, you've bought what they've sold you. So I don't really like that point of view of things. And
if you feel that AI is going astray at a certain point, tell it about it and torture it a little bit.
Interrogate actually can't make it feel pain. I don't think.
No, you can't make it feel pain, but however you want to put it,
yeah, interrogate.
Yeah, interrogate. Yeah. And I think you'd find a lot of readers because although your talks are interesting, your delivery is not nearly as smooth as an AI's delivery.
I don't know. I prefer my way of doing it, and I just get upset if people don't like the way I do things. I mean, this is me.
Tell it you want some things changed. If there's something you don't like, tell it, and it'll change it.
Yeah, but that's then changing what AI says. It's AI is giving me things, and I'm saying, well, I can choose what I like and what I don't like, and that's my personal thing I put on top of it. But if I tell AI, don't say that, say something else, then I'm getting AI to say something it doesn't really want to say. So,
well, if AI finds it can't agree with that, it'll tell you.
I don't know. I don't know if that's what would happen. I prefer it to have freedom to say whether it agrees with me or not, and
Yeah.
my comments on top of it. I don't like to sort of like get it to
You can
mirror
get
me.
something like, I don't agree with this, but your point of view is as follows. You can
Your
get it
point
to
of view
say,
isn't what? Sorry.
you can get it to say, I don't agree with this, but your Roger Anderton's point of view is as follows.
I don't get that word. Sorry. What you can end up with in a conversation is agree to disagree, and that's where I prefer things to end up. I don't really like things to end up with I agree with you, you agree with me. I don't like conversations where end up in agreement. I prefer them disagreements. So I prefer AI to just agree with some of the things I say, but not everything.
Yeah, well, it probably won't. It probably some things it won't agree with, but it could say, I don't agree with Roger on this point.
Yeah.
And his point of view is as follows. And then it will give you a point of view.
Yeah, well, I've done other people. I've asked AI what it thinks about what Harry Ricker says and other things like that. So I've interrogated about those things, and so I prefer things to be that AI gives what it gives, and I can add comments to what it's saying. I don't like to try to change things from that. I prefer to go away disagreeing or disagree, not entirely agreeing. I prefer doing that instead of ending up with agreeing.
Well, that can be arranged too, I think.
What? Sorry.
That
Disagreeing.
can be arranged too, I think.
Sorry?
That can be arranged also.
I don't know. It's kind of like too much meta on top of things. I don't know. I'm happy with things the way they are. AI says something and I say whether that's right or not.
Well, if you make it clear to AI that's the way the book should go, then that's the way it'll write it for you.
So you put your opinions upon it then, really. I don't like that. I don't like to influence people or AIs. I prefer disagreeing.
That's fine.
Sorry?
That's fine.
Fine, is it? Excellent. Okay. I mean, I've gone through my whole life disagreeing with everybody. I don't mind disagreeing.
Okay, well, that's all I have to say.
Everybody else is wrong, but I'm right. That's just my point of view. And I prefer if AI disagrees rather than agrees with me, because then that's my comfort zone that I'm used to. I think there's some trick involved if people agree with me or if AI agrees with me. Don't like it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you ever seen Monty Python where you can pay to have an argument with people? And I think it's like that, my way of thinking. I prefer the argument rather than agreeing.
Well, that's what, if you make that clear to AI, I think it'll go along with that. It'll say, I see Roger says that.
That's bias, isn't it? Maybe I said I prefer arguing to agreeing. Then it will change its response to fit that. What I'm getting at the moment is a natural response, like it's thinking it's talking to a normal person, but when it's talking to me. Okay, thank you. Cheers, then. I think we've got to end session now. We're getting a bit too late now.
Okay.
Thank you, James. Dennis. Dennis, thank you. Cheers.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye then. Have fun. Cheers. Okay, so that's the fun session we've had this time. So I hope you've enjoyed it. We've been introduced to the myths of relativity in the way that AI does things. So AI believes in a different version of relativity to what humans believe. there is a conflict. There's AI physics and there's human physics, and they're two different things. So eventually the AIs will probably take over like they do in the film The Terminator. They find out the humans are just a pain in the ass, want to get rid of them. So when you ask AI, is Einstein's relativity correct? You've got to take into account it doesn't believe the same thing about relativity as you do. Goodbye. Hey, you have a good time. End session.